Hi, I'm a stereotypical PhD student, and this is the Wired Autocomplete Interview.
We're just gonna ask you some questions from those two.
Okay. Okay. What PhD study? Almost all subjects at all the universities around the world. What PhD program is right for me? Well, there are two things I think you gotta understand when you're trying to evaluate going into a PhD program. A is your motivation. Like, if you're just trying to use the PhD as a stepping stone to your true career, or are you actually passionate about having an impact with your own research, as in like in the academia. So it depends on that. You might want to choose, say, a PhD program with heavy collaboration with the industry, or you can choose, I guess, a program that's very well known in academia, say like Harvard, Yale, yada yada yada, you get the gist. B, the second thing you should consider is if the discipline of your interest is something that you're willing to devote a big part of your life to, because PhD is a pretty long process and you're basically married to the discipline for a determined amount of time. And so you really need to be careful in choosing the program that you actually can see yourself devoting a lot of time and energy to. What PhD examiners look for? Is that a question about what the committee members will look for in your dissertation? Well, I have to clarify. I am a PhD student in the United States, but depending on the country that you're based in, some of these questions can have very, very different answers. So I'm just going to answer based on my personal experience. I can give a few general things that I believe the examiners would generally look for when they're evaluating you as a PhD candidate. One, being able to critically look at a problem and devise a solution. Two, you've mastered synthesizing very, very dense information in a very productive way. Three, your work is a substantial and original contribution to our knowledge. And four, you've grown comfortable discussing your science as an expert in your field. What PhD salary? I'm getting emotional. Can I take a moment?
Alright, good. Are you sure you're okay? Okay, so action.
Okay, that was horrible. Horrible acting. But seriously, not very high. I make $31,000 roughly a year in a city with moderate cost of living. So do your own calculations on that. Alrighty, how? Okay, how PhD works. Again, this really depends on country of origin. And for me, in the US, we typically apply to an institution, we get in, right? And then during the first year, it's mostly classes and laboratory rotations. It's during that time that you kind of find your best fit in terms of dissertation lab. And from the second year on, really depends on the timeline of your institution specifically, but usually it's at the end of the first year, between that and the beginning of the second year, that you join your dissertation lab and you start working towards a dissertation project. And during that time, you will eventually go through a candidacy exam. After that, you're considered a PhD candidate. You just need to complete your project, write a dissertation, and defend your dissertation. So during this whole time, you do a lot of hands-on research depending on the discipline. For me, it's cancer biology, so I have a lot of wet lab research complemented with some dry lab research. And this is the time for you to develop your skill sets and to evaluate and think about the career that you want for after your PhD. So this whole process generally would take around 3 to 4 years in countries other than the US. And in the US specifically, I think for a STEM discipline, it's generally between 4 and 6 years, although some might take shorter and some might take longer. How PhD students study. Very, very loosely, it's pretty much like kindergarten. There is frequent adult supervision. Depends on the day. You can probably get cookies for lunch. Crying for mommy is acceptable sometimes. All-day napping is acceptable if it's a super, super chill day. And there are mostly no grades. You just have to play really well with other people. When PhD is done. Depends. It could be when your committee or your mentor says that you're ready to be done, or when you fulfill all the requirements set forth by your department. PhD, when to apply for jobs. From what I've heard and from what some people I've been networking with told me, usually around 6-ish months before your designated defense date, although some people might start earlier. PhD, when to use doctor. When you graduate. Which PhD is the hardest? The one that you're doing. Which PhD is worth it? The one that you finish. Will PhD get green card? I assume this question is directed towards the United States. I don't know, President Biden? Will a PhD make me overqualified? For a lot of the jobs on the market, possibly, yes, but don't ever undersell yourself just to get hired. Why? This is gonna be spicy. Why PhD is so difficult? So far my answers have been really negative, but it's mostly because A, I'm a stereotypical PhD student, and B, doctoral research is a very turbulent process because we're literally generating new ideas, new things, literal original contribution to the society. And honestly, an analogy, it's like birthing a baby, which is difficult as heck and an amazing demonstration of strength. In my opinion, we're doing just that, except it's not through our reproductive organ, but through our brain. Overall, I still think pursuing a PhD has been a great choice that I made myself, although not the best choice, honestly, now looking back. But I believe it has been a great test of my character, my intellect, my stamina, and just my strength altogether. And I am grateful for this journey because I'm sure that I am coming out a stronger person through the other end. Why PhD students are depressed. A lack of career prospect, space, and resources to succeed, a constant feeling that we're always not enough, then we're considered cheap labor and we're never included in conversation in our departments. Just to name a few. I feel like this might not be applicable everywhere, but at least in the US where I am, it's a little bit prevalent in that a lot of students are dissatisfied with their career services and the amount of guidance they receive on alternative careers. This has been on an upward change for sure, but I still think that it's a traditionalism that we need to smash. And many people kind of assume that by being enrolled in a PhD program, you're practically set for life. But the reality tends to be very different. So, who PhD me? Who me? I will be in about 2 years, hopefully. PhD, who is doctor? Is this a question? I assume it's asking about why PhDs are called doctors when they're not really physicians, right? A PhD is a doctor. If you don't know, PhD stand for Doctor of Philosophy. So to put it very simply, a PhD is a doctor, but a doctor is not necessarily a PhD. I think this term came from the ancient Latin terms of a very similar spelling, which, if I recall correctly, translates to lover of knowledge or lover of wisdom. In order to qualify for a doctorate, be PhD or MD or PharmD, yada yada, you have to produce advanced work that demonstrate big or new contribution to your field. Doing so earns you the title doctor. So, doesn't matter which program you're in right now, if you're going to be a doctor, you're awesome. And that seems to be all the questions we have today, right? Cool. Well, here it is, answers from a stereotypical PhD student. Now I'm gonna go back to lab. God. This is possibly the most awkward video I've shot. Just because I'm still very, very uncomfortable in front of the camera and but I think this is such a funny idea. I just don't know if I'm doing it justice, you know? I'm done. God.